I've spent the last 2 weeks 3D printing my dream hobby storage setup for mini painting. Today, I'm going to show you how I did it, what went wrong, and why it might just be my favourite project yet. To rewind for a few moments here, this all started quite a while back when I decided that I wanted to upgrade my hobby station. Not only has my miniatures hobby outgrown the original setup, but now I also use it in the background of videos, and to be frank, it wasn't the prettiest thing to look at. In my last video here on the channel, I covered my plan and layout for this new and improved hobby station, using the Hobby Boss system by BattleBoss, a set of 3D printable modular files from their recent Kickstarter. Using these, I integrated a plethora of drawers, paint storage, and shelving, as well as including a few pieces of my old system for brushes and displaying models. And that is where we'll be starting today. And yes, there will eventually be a backboard and camera rig attached to this desk, but that's for another video. In the last video, I did get a few comments asking exactly where people can pick up the files that I'm using for my system. So to quickly cover that, the Kickstarter is still fulfilling a few of the last files for this system. But I'm pretty sure that once those have been delivered, the system will be available on my mini factory. So I'll be sure to add those links to the description as soon as they're available. But aside from the 3D files, what exactly am I using to get this printed? In my last video, I mentioned that I had decided on marble PLA for the bulk of this project. And speaking of which, all of the marble filament for the first stage of this build was kindly sent to me by Sediment. And after my first few prints, I went ahead and ordered a bunch more of their stuff myself. The quality was looking fantastic, and it was such a breeze to print with this filament using the included profiles for Bamboo Studio, specifically using the ones provided for the Bamboo Lab A1 printer, which is the printer that I used for all of these interconnecting parts, the spacers, the risers, and the paint holders, all using the hardened steel 0.4mm nozzle. And I had the printer equipped with the smooth plate for a nice flat bottom surface. In my last video, I mentioned a slight variance in the tolerances between my various printers. Specifically, my Neptune 4 Pro seems to produce fractionally smaller prints than the A1. I did still decide to use this printer for most of the larger draws, as the tolerances don't need to be super precise for those fit-ups, so it was good to utilize this printer to help speed the project along. But as I started to print this colossal project, naturally, I ran into a few hiccups. The system claims to print support-free, allowing for pretty easy slicing and printing. And while that might technically be true, after starting to print some of the risers that needed to be printed more vertically, my A1 started to struggle, and knocked these off the bed mid-print. Luckily, these are the only parts that needed vertical printing like this, so it should be easy enough to reorient these pieces and add in some easy-to-remove support material. Which, of course, I immediately forgot to do, resulting in some pretty rough-looking pieces on a few of these parts. But rather than wasting a ton of filament reprinting these parts, I think we'll just do our best to clean them up and tuck them away in the back of the build when we assemble. I did find myself going back and forth, testing some different slicer settings for this project, mostly trying to keep this stage of the build within the 10 kilos of filament I had on hand, while still maintaining a good strength and quality to the pieces. I experimented with 2 walls and more infill, then tried 4 or 5 walls with just lightning infill. Eventually, I found a sweet spot of 3 wall loops and using adaptive cubic infill, just strong enough to support the top and internal faces. During this part of the project, I stumbled across a great video by Made With Layers that goes really in-depth on this walls versus infill debate for stronger, more sturdy prints. I'll leave some links down below if you want to check that out. I also swapped back and forth between different speed settings to try and find something that produced great looking prints without taking days, slowing down the outer walls and overhangs, but speeding up some of the internal structures. I'll throw a full screenshot of the settings I settled on up on screen now, and as always, my Patreon members will get direct downloads to these printer setting configs over on my Discord, if you're more interested in a direct download. Speaking of which, if you do like what I'm doing here and want to help support the channel, check out the Discord, or just get your hands on some cool STLs for your printer, do consider checking out my Patreon. I'll leave some links down below. From here on out, most of the parts printed perfectly. However, given that the system is still finalizing a few of its files, not everything is here yet. so there were a few things I was still missing for my setup. One such issue that I ran into was that the various Citadel-sized paint racks all have these small indents for additional paint storage, which I didn't need for my layout. So I hopped into Blender and quickly edited these STLs to remove these features before printing. Another issue was that the drawer system only had backstops for large drawers, meaning that nothing would stop the thin drawers from sliding right out the back of the build. So, after some quick modelling, I designed a set of slightly more universal stoppers that did the trick for my setup. Over on the Neptune 4 Pro, however, things were a little rough. The first few prints wouldn't stick to the build plate, and when one finally did, it managed a dramatic layer shift partway through. After re-leveling and tweaking my slicer, I eventually got the larger drawers printing well enough. That said, the small drawers were just too finicky to print well, so I moved those back over to the A1. At this stage, I got to move on to some of the additional pieces that weren't using marble PLA. For the drawer handles, I picked up some sediment matte black PLA, and I chose to beef up my settings for these parts. 3 extra bottom layers, an extra wall, and some more infill, just to make sure they felt nice and sturdy and well weighted in the hand. Next up, on the Kickstarter page, this setup is shown with these panels, which they use to hide the clip sockets on the front of their station. These parts are also still pending for the system, so again, I decided to quickly mock up my own in Blender. Slicing the clips in half and sizing up a rectangle against the riser, I was able to make a nice simple panel, which, due to this 45-degree bevel and slight gap, should work even in the corner of the setup. I chose to print these off in a nice, subtle ice blue matte PLA, once again from sediment. And after a quick revision to my design, these were all ready to go. Now, after printing off dozens of clips across both printers, removing the supports from these various short drawer risers and making sure to get rid of the support interface on these prints, cleaning up the spaghetti mess on my problematic supportless prints, I reckon it's finally time to start assembling. I'm going to start out here by building a few sub-assemblies of the various stacked parts of the build, creating one section at a time, and then we can piece it all together over on the desk here in a moment. Sometime soon I will be doing an in-depth video about everything going into these drawers, covering my must-have hobby tools and favoured equipment. But for now, I'm going to at least get all of my paints, glue, and brushes into the setup, so that we can take a proper look at where it's at so far. Pending the display board and the camera rig, this hobby station is still looking pretty damn epic. If you'd shown this to me years ago when I first started miniature painting, I would have been absolutely ecstatic to have something like this on my desk. And very soon this will be making a way nicer backdrop for videos. A space that not only will allow for bigger and better projects here on the channel, but will just generally provide me a much nicer space for mini painting. And, of course, will act as a much more fitting backdrop for the Painted for Combat channel. Thank you so much for tuning into the second part of this colossal project. Be sure to subscribe down below so that you don't miss out on the rest of the build. There's still plenty more to go and a bunch of awesome details to add. Of course, like if you liked, but more importantly, and once again, thank you so much for watching. And as always, have a good one.